story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love.
Okay, so Jacob and Haran is what we're going to call this section. And it starts in verse 29. I want to pull this map up real quick, just so we get an idea about this trip. He was way down here in Beersheba. Through chapter 28, he moves to Bethel, which is right here. And then this next trip brings him all the way up there. Somewhere in that journey, he had that vision. I don't know if it was the first night or the second night or exactly even how long it took him to get there, but it was not a short trip. And so it's not about the trip. That's what we need to understand. We don't need to know about the events. And so the event that we are told about the trip, which is the vision that we studied about last time, becomes much more significant. Realizing we're not told anything else about what happened on that trip, the fact that we're told about that tells us that it's important for us to know. Else it wouldn't be there. So that's what's happening. He's now in Haran. Verse 29, chapter 1, I'll get it out in a minute. Chapter 29, verse 1. Jacob went on his journey, came to the land of the sons of the east, and he looked and saw a well in the field. Behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it. For from that well they watered the flocks. Now, the stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, they would then roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back on its place on the mouth of the well. And I'm going to stop there and let's talk about this for just a minute. There's already 3 flocks of sheep there. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean that there were a lot of sheep there. And 3 different groups of shepherds. Okay, these were not from the same people. There were already people sitting there just waiting. Now, this goes against every American bone in our body. Because what do we hate doing more than anything in the world? Waiting. We think that we are doing what? Wasting time. A lot of other places in the world, that's not the way it works. I had a friend that preached in Brazil for, I think, 5 or 7 years or something. Even went through the trouble of learning Portuguese so he could speak in their native tongue before he went down there. And when he came back from one of his visits, I had breakfast with him and I asked him, I said, well, what was the biggest thing you had to get used to? And he said, I'll tell you, when I got to the airport, one of the brethren met me. It was a Saturday. And I said, what time do we start tomorrow? And he said, in the morning. And I said, well, I know that. But what time do we start? And he went, in the morning. And there was actually a breakdown of communication because the way they did things were people just started going to the meeting place. And when everybody got there, that's when they started. Everybody just sat around waiting. Once everybody arrived, now it's time to start. Then, by the way, they didn't stop for a long time. But that concept is weird to us, but that's exactly what's being described here. These people got their sheep to the water source, but they just sit and wait because until everybody gets there and everybody's sheep is there, nothing happens. Why? Because the rock is so big, they don't want to keep moving it back and forth. I'm not going to get there and move the rock and water my sheep and move it back and the next guy come and have to do it. No, we'll just all get there. When we all get there, we'll move it one time. Everybody will water, we'll close it back up, and we'll be done for the day. So that is the picture that's being painted here in these verses. That is what he comes up on. Are these people waiting? Jacob said to them, my brothers, where are you from? They said, we're from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we know him. And he said to them, is it well with him? And they said, it is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. And he said, behold, it's still high day. It's not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them. What's he trying to do? He's trying to get them out of the way. Hurry up, get out of here. Y'all go ahead and water your sheep and go back to the pasture so that he is alone. See, he's smart. They said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered. And they roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, this indicates that they talked a little longer than the few little words that we have recorded here indicates, because they wouldn't have had time to water and get lost, which is what he clearly was trying to get to happen, if it was really a one-sentence conversation. So they talked all this while. In essence, that's what was said. That's what we need to know about what was said. And Rachel shows up. She actually gets there. For we're told she was a shepherdess. And it came about when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Jacob is not willing to wait. He's going to be the gentleman. And he's going to move the stone so she can water her sheep. Jacob kissed Rachel. This is not a amorous kiss. This is a familial kiss. We're going to see just a moment that Laban kisses Jacob. It's just how you greet your family, even though they had never met each other. He kissed her, and he told Rachel that he was a relative of her father, that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Okay, so Laban is his mother's brother, so Rachel is his cousin. So it came about when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him. Now there's an implication there that some of the servants must have been sent back to the house, or that the grapevine was really, really good in the area. But anyway, news got back to Laban before they got to Laban's house, and Laban comes to him, embraces him, kisses him, brought him to his house, and then he related to Laban all of these things. So he tells Laban the story. I'm assuming he goes back and tells Laban, Mom and Dad sent me back here to look for a wife. This is what happened. He may have even told him the story about the dream. I don't know. But he basically explains why he is in town. Laban says, surely you're my bone and my flesh, and he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Now, that implies that during that month, what was he doing? He was working, but he wasn't being compensated. And so Laban says, look, just because you're my kin doesn't mean you shouldn't get something out of your work. Tell me, what shall your wages be? Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were, and by the way, Greg's teaching, I guess. He's not in here. Anybody read the New King James Version? Anybody reading out of the New King James Version? What does it say in verse 17? Okay, Leah's eyes were delicate. Some say weak. Yeah, some say weak. This one says weak. King James says something else completely. Tender. The contemporary English version says Leah was older than Rachel, but her eyes didn't sparkle. Not real crazy about that one, but it's there. The Holman Christian Standard Bible, which is a very good translation, by the way, says Leah had ordinary eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. We got weak. We got this one. This is one of my favorites, actually. Leah had attractive eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and beautiful features. We got attractive, we got weak, we got tender, we got tender eyes. Just kind of seems like not a bad thing, right? You want people to have tender eyes. You like it when people look at you tenderly. What is this actually saying about Leah is where I'm getting at. And do we know? Yeah, but not exactly. I don't think that's exactly what it's saying. I think that's what most of the translators, at least the ones that translate it weak, are trying to get at. But the word that is translated weak here is a word that actually there's 4 different English words that can be used. Gentle. She had gentle eyes. And that don't sound ugly, does it? In fact, you would think that would be a good thing. Tender. That sounds very similar to gentle. Soft. That's a good thing. You don't want somebody with hard eyes. You want somebody with soft eyes. And then the fourth one is weak. Okay, it may be an idiom that's reflective of her personality as much as anything else, but there's clearly a contrast being set up. And so as we read this, and it says, and I'll go ahead and read it as it's here in this translation that I read. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and face. What I really think is being said here is that Leah may have been attractive, but Rachel was knocked down dead gorgeous. Leah may have had attractive eyes, but everything about Rachel was attractive. She was attractive both in form and in face. And so, to kind of put this in perspective, we all have been around groups of sisters, and there's usually one that stands out. And you say, well, that's the pretty one. I've even been around some identical twin sisters, and that's the way people distinguish them. This one is the pretty one. It's simply saying that there was something special about Rachel, that Rachel stood out compared to Leah. Whether that was purely physical or whether that was character and nature, I don't know. I think it lends itself to be physical in nature, but you do have to keep in mind that he's already spent how much time with them? A month. So he's gotten to know them. So there is a possibility that the character is being reflected in this as well. But I do think that it's probably some kind of a Hebrew idiom that carried with it a meaning that goes beyond the actual words that are used. Her eyes are weak. Okay, what does that mean? Well, if I say I'm pulling your leg, do I actually pull your leg? No, I don't actually touch your leg, and I don't pull anything. What am I saying if I say I pull your leg? I'm kind of joking with you and teasing you. No, I'm just pulling your leg. It's possible that this is some type of a Hebrew idiom that's saying, in a nice way, she's not overly attractive. She's not ugly necessarily, but she's not anything special. But Rachel, on the other hand, Rachel was something special. And that's the force of what's being talked about here. This is important information. We're not just being told that for general purposes. We're being told that to understand how Jacob feels about these two girls. How Jacob feels about these two girls, he has a definite attraction to one over the other. Yeah. But that was a familial thing. Laban kissed him too, so I hope there was no physical attraction there. The very next verse. Leah's eyes were weak. Rachel was beautiful in form and face. Now Jacob loved Rachel. So verse 17 is really setting up the basis on which he determined and chose her. So he said, I'll serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And he says, it's better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So he's been there for a month, and he's been working for him. And he says, well, I should be paying you something. What should I pay you? And he says, look, I'll work for you 7 years if you'll let me marry your daughter. And he says, okay, stay and work. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. And they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. That's one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. Listen, if you love God, his commandments are not burdensome. That's what the Bible says. This is saying the same thing. 7 years of work, nothing. Listen, everybody, I'm going to just assume that everybody in the room has at some point taken over the task of cleaning a flower bed, pulling weeds and doing that kind of stuff. And everybody gets this idea about how nice it'll be if the flower bed's cleaned up, and they go, I'm going to go clean up the flower bed. This is going to be great. It's going to be no big deal, and I'm going to enjoy what I do. And then you go out there and you start pulling weeds, and 30 seconds later, you've got a half a weed pulled out of the ground, and you think you've been working for a month. And you look at your watch and you go, really? I just got here? He worked for 7 years. He didn't care. He was fine with that 7 years because he loved her. When you love, it's not too hard. Doesn't matter how hard it really is. Was shepherding easy? Wasn't anything easy about it. But it seemed as but a few days. When you love what you're doing, or you love who you're doing it for, you do it for a lot longer than you would ordinarily be willing to do it. There is something important to learn about this. What am I willing to do for my spouse? What am I willing to do for my children? What am I willing to do for my grandchildren? As Greg is wont to say, you'll do a lot of stuff for love that you won't do for money. And that's essentially what we're being told in this text. What do you want your wages to be? Well, don't worry about the money. I got my eye on your daughter. If you'll let me marry your daughter, I'll work for 7 years. No big deal. 7 years, whoop, just flies by. They seem as but a few days. Because every day he goes out there and he starts to work and he sweats and he toils and he gets dirty and he deals with those flocks and he does the things that he does for Laban. And every day he does it and thinks about what? At the end of this, I get Rachel. And so this is fine. I'm happy to do it. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is completed, that I may go into her. That is definitely a Hebrew idiom. Laban gathered all the men of the place, made a feast. Why did he make a feast? We're having a wedding. Came about in the evening that he took his daughter Leah. And he brought her to him, and Jacob went into her. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob says, that's okay. No. He says, what is this you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served for you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban says what? It's not our practice to marry off the younger before we marry the older. No. What happened was 7 years later, Leah still wasn't married. And he goes, go ahead. You also don't know, we don't get anything about the conversation between Laban and his daughters either. Like the screaming and crying that Leah might have done. About, wait a minute, you're actually going to give my younger sister in marriage before me? That's not the way it ought to be done. We don't know any of that, but we know what he did, and we know that it says that Jacob felt deceived, and he was. And Laban's excuse is, this is just the way we do things. Oh, there is a whole lot left out that we don't know, absolutely. And there's even more to the story that we haven't covered yet. We're told this little piece of information to explain a lot of the stuff we're going to be reading about in the next several chapters. How did he get into the position of having these 4 women in his life? That's going to develop. And it affects his offspring. Now keep in mind, he's received a promise from God that is from his offspring. That the world is going to be blessed. And this gets complicated. Men complicate things. That's the real lesson here. God has a simple plan. Men make it hard. He says, complete the week of this one. What does it mean, complete the week of this one? That's also kind of idiomatic to their custom, so we want to make sure we understand what that's saying. Okay, think a honeymoon. That's the American way of doing things. Think of a honeymoon. Okay, there was a week. You went in and you had this week that you spent with your new bride, and you didn't work, and you just... Now, there's some other customs that came up in other places that I like even better, but we won't get into those right now because it's not pertinent to this part of the story. But that was the custom there, apparently, is you gave a whole week to your new bride. He said, finish the week of this one, and I'll give you the other one also for the service which you shall serve with me in another 7 years. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking that means he waits 7 more years for Rachel. No, he waits a week. And then he marries Rachel, but works another 7 years to work off the debt. So anyway, Jacob did so, completed her week, and he gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife, and Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. So coming along with the new wife is also a maidservant. So Jacob went into Rachel also. And indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban for another 7 years. Listen, his marriage is a week old. He's already with his wife's sister. That's what's going on here. He never loved Leah. He never asked for Leah. He never wanted Leah. He never chose Leah. When he went into Leah to begin with, he didn't even know she was Leah. Somebody asked the question, how could he not know? I presume she was veiled. I don't know. I wasn't there. But he didn't know. It was dark. Because it says, when it was morning, then he became aware. But at any rate, yep. Yep. So, well, she may have been. We don't know that. But that's a good point. We don't know. There's things that we don't know. Because all that we're told here, the stuff that's pertinent to the story. The story is showing us the dynamics of this family. It starts with God making a promise to Jacob, you're the chosen one. Just like I chose Abraham, I chose your father Isaac, I have chosen you. Now we're learning about the dynamics of his family, which in a lot of crazy, weird ways mirror some of the dynamics of his grandfather's family. And it was a big mess back then, and it's a bigger mess now because he doesn't just have 2 sons, he has 12. And so it's just a big mess. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved. That's the next thing we're told. He opened her womb. Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore about. We don't know this yet. I kind of talked about it at the end of class last time. I'm going to go ahead and spoiler, if you don't want to hear it yet, plug your ears up or something. Leah ends up being the chosen wife, not Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel. God chose Leah. Now, we're told this story to show that it was actually Leah's father and not Jacob that put Jacob and Leah together. But God chose Leah. And that's going to become very, very clear as this story progresses. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved. He opened her womb, and Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. So he gets his name because she's convinced, well, I bore him a son, so he has to love me now. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. So she named him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. You see a pattern developing here? Nobody else is having babies. Leah's having babies. She says, surely he's going to love me now that I've given him a son. Nope. God still sees I'm unloved. Give me another son. Nope. Okay, this is a 3rd son now. He definitely is going to have to love me now, right? Names him Levi. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah, and she stopped bearing. Now, there's a transformation in Leah as well. Do you see what happened there? The first son, it was all about, this is going to make my husband love me. This is going to make my husband love me, number 2. This has to make my husband love me, number 3. The 4th one, she just says, you know what? I'm thankful to God I had another son. Then she stopped bearing. Now, she has 2 more later. I made a mistake last time I taught class, and I said her youngest son, he was the youngest of the first group. Here's my, Jacob's anger burned against Rachel. So Jacob gets mad at Rachel. Why is Jacob mad at Rachel? Yes. No, Jacob's anger burned against Rachel. And then he expressed his displeasure, and she responds, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? In other words, he's mad because she's not having any babies. He still loves Rachel. That's still the one that he loves. That's the one he wants to have kids with. Right. Okay. Right. So they get mad at each other. And she says, look, I'm not God. I don't have anything to do with this. And so she says, here's my maid Bilhah. Does that sound familiar? Go into her that she may bear on my knees. Again, that's an idiom. That she may bear on my knees. In other words, that she may bear a child for me. That can be accredited to me. That through her I too may have children. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore a son. And Rachel said, God has vindicated me, and has indeed heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she named him Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again, bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed. Do you see an attitude issue here? She named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, how fortunate. So she named him Gad. This is the craziest stuff I've ever heard in my life. They're competing with each other. Apparently not. And apparently he wasn't very discerning. He never told them, no, I'm married to you. I'm not married to them. Let's not do this. He didn't learn anything from his grandfather. He's like, oh, okay. So now he's having kids with 4 different women. And by the way, that's how he got to 12 kids in a relatively short period of time. Because if you're having kids with 4 different people, it can happen quicker. So that's what's going on here. And again, notice her response is how fortunate. How fortunate is it this other woman is having a child with my husband that I want to love me so bad. And he doesn't. Leah's maid Zilpah bore him a second son, and Leah said, happy am I, for women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. Now in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field. Listen, if you think you got a weird family and weird things in your family that you don't want other people to know about and talk about, you don't have nothing on these people. Reuben went and found some mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your mandrakes. She said to her, is it a small matter for you to take my husband? Would you also take my son's mandrakes? So Rachel said, therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. So she's got these mandrakes. By the way, I don't know what mandrakes taste like, never eaten one. But she got them and she's like, oh, I want some of those. And she's like, you took my husband from me, now you're going to take my son's mandrakes from me? Yeah, it is. It's kind of parallel to Esau and the stew. And you're going to take my mandrakes too? Well, I'll tell you what. If you'll give me the mandrakes, I'll let you sleep with Jacob tonight. That's exactly what she says here. When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, hey, you must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. Do you hear this? This is messed up. So he lay with her that night. I don't understand why he didn't have a problem with that. He got mad that Rachel wouldn't have babies from him, but he doesn't get mad that Leah comes to him and says, hey, I bought you tonight. You got to come into my tent tonight because I gave my mandrakes to Rachel so that you would be with me tonight. He goes, okay. God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my maid to my husband. No, that's not what God's doing, but that's the way she interpreted it. Leah conceived again and bore a 6th son to Jacob. Leah said, God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Did he all of a sudden, because she's had 6 sons, now start loving Leah? No. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. You know who hasn't had a baby in all this story? Rachel. We got 3 women having babies. Rachel still hadn't had a baby. We got people trying to have babies, trying to have more babies than the other person, giving their handmaidens to have babies in their name so that they can claim some kind of victory over the sister. Talk about some sibling rivalry. But it says, then God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. Clearly, this had started to wear on Rachel big time, and she had pled. So she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord give me another son. Now, I think that's interesting, too, that at the birth of her first son, she names him something to reflect her desire for another one. But we just found out why Joseph is Jacob's favorite. Because he loved Rachel. And he wanted Rachel to have a baby all along. And he finally gets a son with Rachel, and that's the one he cares about. Yes, sir.
I think it's interesting. This is pretty messed up. Someone one time had mentioned that if you're, especially in the Old Testament, there are these stories where stuff like this is going on. People are like, why would God do this? Like, why would God have this? God, and when you read these passages, there's no, like, God doesn't tell any of these people to do any of these things. And like, God, this is not like God
His plan. Exactly. What God said was go get a wife. Not go get 4 women. Go get a wife. If he'd have got the one he wanted. Yep. So what you see is the messiness that comes up when people start doing the things that they think are good. Or that they think, or I better put, that they want to happen. And that's part of this story, is that this doesn't prevent God from doing his intended purpose. And what we are going to see, okay, we now are at 11 of his sons have been born at this point, and then a daughter that's named, and then there's going to be a 12th son later. But how do we get to Joseph? And is Joseph the chosen one? Just because Jacob loves Joseph, is Joseph chosen by God to carry the blessing that was given to Jacob? These are the questions you got to ask. So we're going to read an awful lot about Joseph, but I want you to understand we're not reading about Joseph because Joseph is important. We're reading about Joseph because of how he's used to actually accomplish God's purposes, to preserve the one who is chosen. Right now, the only one that's chosen is who? Jacob, at this point. And so a lot of what we learn in the chapters coming up as we move forward is which son becomes the son of promise and why. Why is the one chosen that's chosen? And up to this point, we have seen a pattern that the ones that God has chosen have been the ones that what? Have shown godly character, at least to a degree. So keep that in mind as we move forward. This gets really interesting, and this is the fun part of this book, though it can get complicated. All right, so I stopped at 24, so we'll pick up in 30 and verse 25 next time. And today is the 13th, so it'll be the 20th, correct?
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love.